Triumph makes cafe racers, adventure bikes, and modern classics. They have zero motocross heritage, so when they showed up at a motocross track with a purpose-built 450 and immediately started lapping in competitive times, the industry had a right to be suspicious, which makes sense. But this wasn't luck. Triumph studied how to enter this sport, made a bet, and then actually pulled it off. They didn't rush it, it was a sequencing decision. Triumph did not enter MX with a 450. They entered with a 250. The TF250X dropped in late 2023, and Triumph spent an entire season of real-world development, rider feedback, suspension validation, electronics refinement, chassis learning before the 450 engine ever went into production. That just shows you how serious Triumph was about building that bike. By the time the TF450RC edition arrived in February 2025, the chassis it sat in had already been proven under race conditions. The 450 wasn't a chassis experiment dressed up in yellow, but a new engine program dropped into architecture that had already earned its stripes on the track. That sequencing compressed what could have been a 5-year development arc into something tighter and smarter, and it shows in the finished product. The development story, Ricky Carmichael, Ivan Tedesco, and real racing knowledge. Triumph embedded 2 people into this program who had actual high-level motocross in their hands, not consultants or basic brand ambassadors. Ricky Carmichael, the most decorated motocross racer in the history of the sport, was in from day one. 15 AMA championships total, 7 Premier Class Outdoor MX titles, 5 Supercross titles. One of the only rider in history to go a perfect 24-0 across an entire outdoor season, and he did it twice, in 2002 and 2004. When RC engages in a development program, he brings a level of competitive intuition that can't be replicated or hired. His feedback isn't vague, it's precise, repeatable, and it speaks directly to what an engineer needs to hear. RC didn't just ride the bike and say it felt good. He selected specific components, signed off on a custom engine map, tuned to his exact preferences, handpicked the top engine mounts based on how the chassis loaded under hard braking and heavy front-end pressure, and put his name and number on the finished product. He chose the ODI Podium Flight RC4 handlebars, triple-butted 2014 T6 alloy, tapered wall, 836mm wide. He approved the graphics. Every RC signature element on this bike traces back to a real decision he made during development, not a licensing deal signed after the fact. Ivan Tedesco, Hot Sauce, 2005 AMA 125 National Motocross Champion, 2-time AMA 125 West Coast Supercross Champion, 3-time Motocross Des Nations winner with Team USA, and one of the most respected development test riders in the sport, was embedded as Triumph's full-time US test rider from the beginning of the race program in 2023. 2 riders at that level of feedback accelerates a development program in a way money alone can't buy. Most brands entering a new segment spend years figuring out what a fast rider actually needs the chassis to do, what the power delivery actually feels like under race conditions, where the bike falls apart in a 30-minute moto. Triumph bought that translation layer directly, then funded it properly. The engine, SOHC, but built to a different standard. The TF450RC runs a 449.5 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled SOHC 4-stroke single overhead cam, the correct, proven architecture for a modern MX motor. SOHC keeps the engine compact, lightweight, and narrow in profile. A wide, heavy engine forces the rider to work around the power plant instead of with it. Triumph's motor sits deliberately narrow in the chassis, improving mass centralization and giving the rider room to move front to back without fighting the engine's physical footprint. On a motocross track where body position is a constant variable, weighting the front in a rut, getting back on a steep downhill, driving off a berm, a narrow, compact engine directly translates into easier, more natural movement on the bike. What separates this engine from a competent but forgettable 450 is what's inside it. Del West titanium valves, the same supplier used in factory race builds for fast actuation and maximum airflow. A Koenig-forged aluminum piston for high-load durability at race RPM DLC-coated rockers, diamond-like carbon coating, applied to the valve contact surface to cut friction, reduce wear, and extend the service interval between top-end jobs. The combustion chamber is machined on 3 axes for precise port geometry, meaning the airflow paths aren't approximations, they're exact. That level of internal precision is what separates a bike that makes competitive power from a bike that makes competitive power and keeps making it after 20 hard hours. Fuel delivery runs through a Dell'Orto 44mm throttle body managed by an Athena engine management system. Athena being a well-respected name in aftermarket MX electronics, now integrated from the factory on a production machine. The intake feeds through a twin-air filter in a high-volume airbox with tool-free access. On race day, between motos, you want 2 minutes to pull and service an air filter, not 10. That detail alone tells you this bike was spec'd by people who've actually stood in a paddock on a race day. Electronics, where Triumph separated itself from the class. The TF450RC ships with selectable engine maps, traction control, launch control, and a Quickshifter, all tunable through the MX Tune Pro smartphone app over a built-in Wi-Fi module that comes standard in the box. Not as a $400 accessory, standard. Riders can adjust fuel and ignition curves trackside without a laptop or a dealer visit. That's factory team-level tunability on a $10,995 production bike, and it changes what a privateer or a well-funded amateur can actually do with their setup between motos. Traction control on a motocross bike is a genuinely divisive topic. Most experienced riders reject it because early implementations felt intrusive. The system would cut power at the wrong moment, kill drive, and make the bike feel neutered on surfaces where controlled rear wheel spin is actually a technique, not a mistake. On a hardpack, controlled throttle-induced oversteer is how you rotate the bike through a flat turn. An overly aggressive TC system kills that. Triumph's calibration doesn't do that. Cycle News tested it directly and found it managed wheel spin without killing drive or interfering with the overall riding experience. That calibration precision is the entire difference between a system you leave on and a system you switch off after lap 1 and never touch again. The Quickshifter is standard fitment, clutchless upshifts from 2nd through 5th gear. KTM and Husqvarna are currently the only other brands running this technology on production MX bikes. But testers found that Triumph's implementation responds faster than the KTM and Husqvarna versions. It keeps engine revs higher through the shift rather than letting them dip, which means less RPM loss, cleaner drive out of the upshift, and less disruption to power delivery at the exact moment the gear change happens. In a straight, that's measurable speed. On the face of a jump, it's one less variable. Out of a berm on exit, it's traction you'd otherwise have to clutch for. Launch control holds the motor in an optimal RPM band at the gate, managing ignition and fueling to maximize rear wheel traction off the line and minimize spin under full load. In motocross, hole shot is the first 5 seconds of a race. It determines corner position into turn 1, track selection for the opening lap, and the entire psychological dynamic of the moto that follows. Riders buried mid-pack spend the first 3 to 5 minutes passing instead of racing clean. A production bike with factory-caliber gate drop electronics narrows a gap that used to exist only between the works machines and everything else on the gate. Chassis, suspension, and what KYBAOS actually does. The frame is an aluminum spine and twin cradle design, hand-TIG welded, shared architecture with the TF250X. Subframe, swing arm, rear linkage, and plastics all carry over from the 250 platform. That's not a shortcut, that's the direct payoff of building the 250 first. Triumph validated this chassis through an entire season before the 450 engine went into it, which means when RC was tuning the top engine mounts for front-end feel under braking, he was working with a known quantity, not chasing chassis variables at the same time as engine variables. Suspension is KYB front and rear, 48mm AOS inverted fork with 12.2 inches of travel, fully adjustable KYB piggyback shock with 12.0 inches of travel. The AOS designation is worth understanding. Air/oil separation keeps the fork oil physically separated from air inside the cartridge under repeated hard compression loads, successive whoops, square-edged chop, back-to-back big landings. In a conventional fork, that kind of sustained abuse aerates the oil. An aerated oil is compressible, which means damping behavior drifts as the fork heats up and the oil foams. By lap 15, when the track has blown out and the whoops have squared off, a conventional fork feels noticeably different than it did in the first moto. AOS maintains consistent damping from lap 1 through lap 20. That's a race-relevant engineering detail, not a spec sheet checkbox. For setup, start rear sag at 105 to 108 millimeters. If the bike packs through successive whoops or square-edged hits, add high-speed compression 2 clicks at a time before touching low speed. If the rear kicks on kickers or step-up lips, that's rebound. Slow it 1 click, ride a lap, assess. The chassis balance is tuned neutral to slightly forward biased, which keeps front wheel bite engaged in flat turns and ruts where most 450s start to push. Brakes are Brembo front and rear, dual piston front caliper, single piston rear, biting Galfer rotors at 260mm front and 220mm rear through steel-braided lines. Brembo in this application is the same hardware you'll find on KTM, Husqvarna, and Beta 450s. The X-Trig hole shot device comes standard. It preloads the front fork at the gate, lowering the front end and reducing fork extension under hard acceleration, keeping the front wheel planted longer off the start and cutting the window where the bike wants to loop on you. Why this entry is different from every other new brand in MX. Most brands coming into motocross either borrow an existing platform, Gas on KTM architecture, Husqvarna on the same bones, or spend 5 to 10 years grinding an enduro or road platform toward MX relevance. Both are valid paths, but Triumph's approach was categorically different. clean sheet engineering, properly capitalized, championship-level development riders embedded from the start, a proven chassis already validated through the 250X program, and a parts specification that doesn't apologize for a single line item. At $10,995, the TF450RC comes with a Quickshifter, traction control, launch control, smartphone tuning, Brembo brakes, KYBAOS suspension, Del West valves, DLC-coated internals, an X-Trig holeshot device, and a Hinson clutch cover. On competitive bikes, several of those items are aftermarket additions that cost real money after the sale. Triumph included them because RC insisted the bike ship race-ready out of the crate, not race-adjacent, not almost there, not competitive after $2,000 in bolt-ons. Cycle News described the finished product as feeling most like a Husqvarna FC450 with spring forks, smooth power, composed and responsive suspension, strong brakes, and an agile chassis that rewards precise riding. For a first-year 450 from a brand with no MX history, that comparison is the whole point. Triumph didn't inch toward the front of the class. They arrived there. And if Triumph's approach got you thinking about what it actually takes to build a competitive MX engine from scratch, go watch the Ducati Desmo 450 video next, because Ducati took a completely different route to get to the same place, and that engine is a whole topic on its own.